and I thought I really loved it until I got to the end. And when I got to the end, I've always had this feeling about the Wizard of Oz,
Me
that the
too.
characters in the Wizard of Oz all had what they were looking for. They had
Yeah.
it already.
Yeah.
And there it was. I had never actually gone out and researched what people are saying about the Wizard of Oz. I just had feel they all had it, and the Cowardly Lion had courage, and
Yeah.
the Scarecrow had a brain. But
Yeah.
so at the end of the story, at the end of your book, I mean, you bring that up, and it's like you have what you need to get where you want to go.
Yeah.
and and so how
Yeah.
do we what are your suggestions when someone comes to you and they say, basically, how do I create the life
Yeah.
that I really want?
Yeah.
What starts to
Yeah.
come to mind for you first?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the point you just made about the Wizard of Oz really gets to one of the like biggest themes of the book, which is that we already there's a lot of power and control that we already have, and we unknowingly give it away and don't own the power that we already have. So really trying to figure out, well, okay, kind of coming back to the basics of what do I really want for myself? When you say create the life you want, the first step is, well, what do you want? And that clarity is sounds so simple, but oftentimes, and I've been coaching for a long time, and sometimes that question is not that easy for people to answer. And the reason that it's not easy for them to answer is because they might have a sense of what they wanted. Like, so like if you took them back to their younger self, they would maybe more easily be able to answer that question. But then as time goes by, they have so many considerations about what's going to get in the way of achieving that success that they can't
Yes.
even think it anymore. So the first step is to allow yourself to have ambitions, to have dreams that would make you feel so proud, that would make you feel excited to get up and get out of bed in the morning. So that's the first step, is just the definition of what success looks like a year from today. Not 10 years from today, not even 5 years, but 1 year from today. And that, that ability to dream is step one. And then the second step is to
Well,
believe.
before you go
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
I hear you on this, and like 1 year.
Yeah.
My attention span isn't a year long, but I do need a target. And I know
Yeah.
in the book, what you're doing is you're going to distill this down to like
Yeah.
daily. What can I listen? If you can't take action on your vision today, then you need a new vision.
Right.
Right? Something's wrong here. Something's not working. But what I find is when I ask people what they want, the first thing out of their mouth is what they don't want.
Right.
And I love that. I love that process, because I think you have to kind of go through that a little, and I guess
Yeah.
you're noticing it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100, and I think sometimes people spend too much time complaining about what they don't want or articulating what they don't want. Okay, I think, if you're a coach, to have empathy for people and give them the opportunity to share that. But at the end of the day, you got to be able to articulate what you do want, and say it with great specificity. And one of the examples in the book, we kind of used the example of John F. Kennedy's Man on the Moon speech from 1962 as a really great example of what it sounds like listening to somebody articulate a vision for the future. And what's notable about Kennedy's speech is he talks about what it's going to look like to put a man on the moon as if it's already happened. He says it with so much specificity, and he uses so many great analogies and adjectives. For anybody listening to this, I think going back and listening to the Man on the Moon speech, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when you listen to it. But he paints a picture that's so tangible that somebody else listening to it, they can see it too, which is, again, why it's called a vision, right? So you can see it. And so the first step is like, well, what does it look like? And not vague and not intangible, but tangible, even if you don't know how. And again, that therein lies the challenge, because people get very tripped up by, I don't know all the steps to make that happen, I can't even believe that it's possible, you
Yeah.
know? And that's tricky for people to be able to say things or articulate, something in the future that they don't know how it's going to happen. But again, there's so much power in that.
Yeah.
So that's the first
Talk to
step.
me, talk to me for a second about turning that conversation, because sometimes it depends on if it's just a one-time conversation somebody wants to have, or it's an engagement. But I give myself permission to interrupt them. It's because they'll talk about what they don't want
Yeah.
till the cows come home. So
Yeah.
you say, you interrupt them and say, let me make sure I understand, this, that's a challenge. This is a challenge. Yep. 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 So what do you want? And I think sometimes asking it, 2 or 3 times, you got to do it. I'm just curious how you turn the conversation
Yeah.
Toward the future.
Yeah. I think, the more prescriptive that you can be about what you're asking people to think about and answer, the better. Okay. So sometimes it's not about telling somebody to stop. It's more, here's what I want you to do. And our vision exercise, which is really the cornerstone of, it's one of the key foundations of our work and our book. We ask people these 7 questions and we say, answer these questions. And for example, the first question is, it's a year from today. What are you known for?
Yeah.
And that would be that you would feel so great about. Like you'd love to be known this way, even if you're not currently known this way. And I'm going to give you an example of this, and that I think a lot of people are going to relate to. So, I will attest that, and I'm guilty of this, that years ago, if you had interviewed people in my life and said, tell me about Wendy, one of the key things they would say is, oh, she's really, really busy. She's got a lot on her plate, career, 3 children, all the stuff. And they would say she's got lots going on, and she's, they might say a lot of good things, but one of the big things, and maybe even one of the first things, was she's really busy. And I think when I was really honest with myself, and I did this exercise for the first time, I had to be honest that, like, if I ask people what I'm known for, they're going to say she's really, really busy. And I said, that's not okay with me. I don't want to be known that way. And so I said, well, how would I like to be known? And I forced myself to say, well, what would I really like to be known for? And I had to answer that question. I'd like to be known as patient. I would like to be known as somebody who's a good listener and who cares about the people in their life that matter, things like that. And so that's what I wrote down. And I wrote down what difference it would make if I was known that way, right? Because it's one thing to just put the words out there, but then it's another thing to say, well, my relationships would be deeper. They would be richer if I was known that way. People would trust me more. They would want to spend time with me, right? My family, my work colleagues, people I care about. So that's all 7 questions. They're all slightly different, but they're like that, right? So that's how you separate out all the things you don't want versus, oh, well, here's what I really do want. And I didn't know what I was going to have to do specifically to be known as patient, present, a good listener, all of that stuff. But I knew it's what I wanted, and it forced me to say, I'm going to start here. And
Yes.
then I'll work backwards from there.
Yes.
To figure out what
Yeah.
to do.
I love that. I love that approach. And what I hear you saying really is sometimes the don't want, it can be a platform for the do want.
Yeah.
You got to get that out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't like this. I don't want that, blah, blah, blah. And then
Yeah.
it's like, okay, it's the do want. So I interrupted you. You were going to go, and I didn't want you to run through all the steps because I'm way too curious just to go quickly through them.
Right.
But the second step you were ready to give me. So if somebody's going to change their life in a year, first step, figure out what you want. Second step.
Okay. So the second step is believing that it's possible. And I think, that sounds also so obvious, but oftentimes, we're dragging around our preconceived notions of well, I never did that before. Probably isn't going to happen in the future. Right. And so sometimes we give people these, like, we give people this, we say to people, your vision is going to be bold. There's going to be things in your vision that are bold. And the definition of bold is that it's might be feelings, it feels slightly uncomfortable. Maybe you've never done it before, or maybe you tried it in the past and you failed, but you believe that it could be possible. You don't necessarily know all the ways that it will happen, but the belief that it is possible is the second step. And you know, I think that for most people, if they challenge the limiting beliefs they have about themselves, about the world, about other people, they're more likely, and then we go give people an exercise on doing that, on challenging those beliefs, they're more likely to believe that it's possible. And we say to people, your actions in the present are directly correlated to the future you see as possible, right? So if you believe something's possible in the future, you're going to be consistent with that in the present, and you're going to do things in the present that are going to help you get there, right? And I always use this example about my son, because he, like, through his life has been the poster child of this. So my son is now 18 years old, and I mentioned to you he's going to go off and play college baseball. But when my son was like 7 or 8, he would say to me, and he's always been really into sports, and he would say, Mom, I don't know if I'm going to be in the NFL or the MLB because I am so good at baseball, I'm so good at football, right? And of course, like, I would chuckle, but he genuinely believed that that was possible for himself. And so that was his whole life. Like, he was out there on a field playing all the time. And, we all were like that when we were 7 or 8. Right. We were, the world was sort of wide open. We could be whatever we wanted to be. People would ask you what you want to be, and you could say anything. And then you hit middle school. You hit middle school and high school, and things happen to you. And then all of a sudden you start to, be much more limited in what you can see for yourself in the future. So when I say the second step is believing that whatever it is you're articulating for yourself in the future is possible, it's not as easy as it sounds. And yet it makes an enormous difference to go through that process and challenge the beliefs that we sometimes hold on to very tightly, and yet they really hold us back.
I don't know very many. Most people I know have a loud inner critic, and that voice in the head that is always complaining about you to you.
Yeah.
And how does one shift from the doubts? Not everybody's like your son, right? I'm so awesome, it's going to be a fight between the NFL and and Major League. Which, at 7 or 8, that's fine. But later on we start to learn maybe I'm not all that. And there's a lot of great people out there.
Yeah.
So now we start, self-doubt comes in, like you're saying. How do we shift? What are your suggestions on shifting?
Yeah.
Before you say anything, I just have to tell you. Now, and maybe this is going to be bad, I don't know, but self-belief, I'm all about it. What I don't like, and I hope I'm not offensive here, I don't like people asking kids, what do you want to be when you grow up, and leaving out what seems to me the most important part. Like, oh, you can be anything you want, but nobody talks about what it takes to get what you want.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think instead of asking kids, focusing on, well, you could be president of the United States. That's bull crap. How many kids that we're talking to are going to be president of the United States?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think we could ask them, what are you willing to work for?
Yeah.
What are you willing to give yourself to?
No, I think that's an excellent distinction between, doing something that's maybe really lights you up, feels really bold, might feel a little uncomfortable, but it's kind of within the realm of possibility, versus fantasy. And I think it's all kind of like the pendulum of, many people are stuck in like the status quo of all that's possible is today, right? Then I think what you're talking about is like, don't encourage children to be all the way on the other end of the spectrum in a fantasy without even thinking through what that's going to require of them. But then there's this zone in the middle, and we call that sort of like bold, uncomfortable, but possible.
Yeah.
And yes, it's going to take work in every single case. And right after writing your bold vision is writing your plan, coming up with your plan. And we give people a very prescriptive approach to, work back from the outcomes to what are the steps to do, what do you got to do now? And I think sometimes people are just lacking that structure. We have an excellent structure that helps people with that. But I think your question about the inner critic is a really good question, because it's one of the key blockers for people. We often get in our own way. And one of the things I like to tell people is, I ask people, what are some of the most important relationships that you have in your life? And people will talk about their parents and maybe their manager, or their spouse or whatever. And then they always leave out what I believe to be the most important relationship you'll ever have in your lifetime, which is the one with yourself. And it's so important that it requires nurturing and it requires attention. And often we, leave it out, and we don't do that. So I think, your question of how do you deal with that critical voice that's always there? I mean, the first step is listening to what it's saying, not listening like I'm going to do something about it, but acknowledging.
Yeah.
Here's what it says. Okay. And we actually give people this exercise in our book where we have people actually write it down, because even though it might feel a little bit uncomfortable to do that, in our program, we even sometimes have people read it to another person, because that's like really acknowledging what it says is the first step to sort of saying to yourself, is this really true? Is this really me? Because when you do read it out loud, I think the first reaction, and we've done this with so many hundreds of thousands of people, their first reaction is, yeah, this is a little bit ridiculous. This isn't really true. Because when you think about the kinds of language that critical inner voice often says, it's usually very extreme. I always do this. I never do that. And when you really look at it dispassionately, not in the weakest moment, but in a very rational moment, you get to sort of challenge the real truth in it. And is this really true? And oftentimes the answer is usually not. This is usually not true. And that is a good step. And then, there's lots of other things to be done ongoingly. But I mean, that small step in and of itself seems to make a massive difference to so many people.
Yeah. I found the same thing, that just writing down for 2 or 3 days, whatever comes to mind when you hear the inner critic, just write it down. That's it. Don't even worry about changing it. Just write it down and say, oh, that's what my inner critic's saying. That is the thing that helps people kind of get freed up. So you dabbled in step 3, I think, and that is, what do you want, right? And what do you think is possible? Do you think it's possible? Now we got to start getting the plan.
Yeah.
I think you started dabbling a bit there.
Yeah.
Talk to me about changing my life in a year and developing that plan.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think one of the first things that we ask people to raise their consciousness of is, where in my life am I reactive, and where in my life am I intentional? And when people are honest with themselves about that, and we give lots of examples, we tell lots of stories about this in the book to really bring it to life. When people are honest with themselves about where they're being reactive, and they really look at, okay, where is this happening? And what is the cost of this behavior to me? It gives them access to say, okay, how can I be more intentional? Right? So it could be that you're somebody who, every time you say you're going to, you're committing to certain actions, you're going to wake up early and, hit the gym. And then, you're going to bed too late because you're checking your email till 1 o'clock in the morning, or you're scrolling social media, or just like watching Netflix until too late. And you're doing it, and yet you're doing it and doing it and doing it. And then the alarm goes off and you're too tired because you didn't get enough sleep. That's a very classic reactive behavior. Or it could be something like, every time your client says X, you always react in Y. It's almost like something happens and you just are like on autopilot. And there's usually not a lot of thought behind reactive behavior. And oftentimes it's areas where we're complaining about things in our life. So starting with, where am I being reactive? Where could I be more intentional? And what will that take is a great place to start in terms of, kind of things that you want to start doing just globally in your life. And then, I think after that, it's really like starting with the finish. Okay, what does success look like a year from today?
Yeah.
And then what is that going to take? What am I going to have to do in the next 90 days to start to move the needle in that outcome? And sometimes I think people get overwhelmed. Like, if one of the things in your bold vision has to do with, making a radical change in how you work, or making a radical change in a relationship with somebody that's really important to you, you're not going to do it all in one day. You're not even going to do it all in 3 months. You have a whole year to do it. But the question is, what are a few things I can do now that are going to start to inch me towards the outcome? And I think doing that with rigor and discipline, and doing it with consistency, always makes a difference. And I think sometimes we just don't even think about that. Like, what could that sort of dashboard, if you will, for my life look like? And so we give people the structure to really do that thinking and write those things down, and then stay on track.
Yes. How far out should we try to plan when you think of, because I love the basically reverse engineer your life. Think about,
Yes. Yes.
where you want to up in a year. Let's reverse engineer. What are the increments to getting there? How
Yeah.
far out, when you're doing that, do you think makes most sense?
Well, we usually recommend 90 days, because 90 days, first of all, there's a lot of research on habit formation. Tons has been written about it. There's best-selling books about habit formation, and it takes about 2 to 3 months to create a new habit. So, and a lot of what's in people's plans, some of it are just one-off actions, like go have a conversation with this person, do this research, make this singular change. But a lot of what's in people's 90-day action plans is habitual actions, right? Do this every week. Do this 3 times a week. Speak to these people every week. Do this research every week, right? Or somebody who wants to write a book, write for 20 minutes every day. So these types of habits take about 2 to 3 months. And so we often recommend people have a 90-day action plan, and we give them a recommendation on how to structure it and how to keep updating it, right? So it's something it's like you're looking at it all the time, and you're updating it every few months with new things to do. And the feedback we've gotten from people we've worked with who've done this is oftentimes they're getting way more done than what they perceived to be impossible 3 months earlier. So a lot of people have said to us a year later, we go back and we're like, tell us, how has this made a difference? Like, tell us about your vision. How'd you do? And, invariably there's things that they say, I put that in there, it didn't happen. Maybe it wasn't even a priority anymore a year later. But then what they also say is, I wish I had put more in there. I wish I had gone bigger. I wish I had been bolder, because they did more than they thought they were going to do. And some of it is just being intentional,
Yes.
sticking with it.
Yes. That's
Not rocket
brilliant.
science.
It's just beautiful. I can think of conversations I've had with people, and they're excited about, I want to do this, I'm going to do that, or whatever. I'm going to start a bit, I'm going to do whatever. And when I know them a little bit, and you listen and you talk about it a little bit, and then you say something like, what, I wonder if you're aiming a little low. You know what I mean? Or I think you might have more in you than that. Are you playing it safe?
Yeah.
Which is not a great coaching question, but you know what I'm saying. It's
Yeah.
And then they set back and they like, well, maybe I am playing it safe, and maybe,
Well,
you know what I mean?
yeah. And the fact that you said that to them is part of what has them say, well, if he thinks I am, then maybe I am. I think one of the things we tell people, one of the reasons why our power principle says declare a bold vision and share it, is the concept of sharing it, and the massive benefit of telling somebody else what we're aspiring to do, even if it feels uncomfortable, right? And we all know that it feels very vulnerable to share bold ambitions because we're afraid people are going to judge us, or, we feel like we're on the hook, or we might fail publicly. But the benefit of doing that is just enormous. I mean, we all know that we're much more likely to accomplish something just by writing it down. In fact, the number is 42% more likely just by writing it down. But then if you tell somebody what you're going to accomplish and you ask them to stay connected to it, hold you accountable, you're twice as likely to make it happen just by telling somebody. So that is the thing that we always encourage people to do, is don't just write it down and keep it a secret. Share it with anybody who might be able to support you. The other thing too is that people sort of start showing up and helping you, which is always awesome to get that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Beautiful. In this whole, I like to think of it as bring the outside in, and going it alone, this whole Lone Ranger thing, that's just for the birds. It's like nuts. It's like, and I'm an introvert, and, I live so much of my life basically that way, and it's like, that's small living that, and no offense to introverts. I'm just saying we got to have people in our world. So very, very powerful.
Yeah. And I think even an introvert, this doesn't leave an introvert out, because it doesn't mean you need to get up on a big stage. And this could be that you tell your significant other, or just maybe you have this dialogue with just your manager. The other thing I would just say about this that's been so powerful is when we do this work with teams at organizations, having a team do this exercise together, the vision part and also the planning part, and even looking at the limiting beliefs and all that other stuff, it's so powerful, because one of the things we know about human beings, myself included, guilty as charged, we all tend to be risk averse, right? We don't want to think big. And I think especially when it comes to work stuff, we want to look good. We want to deliver what we say we're going to deliver. The last thing we want to do is put some bold ambition out there, and then a year later, failure. Nobody wants that. And yet, when people are playing it safe and playing small, there has an outsized impact on organizations, culture, and business growth. So this exercise has been so powerful when a whole team does this together, and everybody feels permission to think big, play big, dream big. It's energizing. People end up accomplishing more than they would have. And when they do fail, I think collectively, it's made safer in a group environment, that it's okay not to accomplish everything you set out for yourself. I mean, Lisa and I had that we were going to write a book for years in our vision, and it didn't happen. It happened when we were ready for it to happen. But, sometimes you put stuff in there and it doesn't happen. That's okay.
Right. Yeah. So what do you want? You got to believe it's possible. Get a plan together, 90 days, work backwards, get a 90-day plan.
Share it.
Share it.
Sharing.
What's the fourth thing I need to do to change my life in a year?
Yeah. Well, there's a whole chapter in the book. And actually sequentially, we put that chapter pretty early in the book because it's so profound. And that chapter is called Choose a New Perspective. And it's about the stories that we tell ourselves, very similarly to limiting beliefs. But oftentimes these stories become so real to us. And this is remember when we started with the Wizard of Oz and giving away our power. And oftentimes this is why we do it, because we make up stories about other people and about circumstances and about dynamics and groups of people and situations. And we believe so wholeheartedly that they're true. And our brain is great at helping us to continue to reinforce their truth because they collect evidence for these stories. And, until we kind of come up with a way first of all, the motivation to challenge them is recognizing the cost that they have in your life, right? So we talk a lot about that in the book and give a lot of examples. I share a very profound one about my relationship with my son, but it's applicable to any area of your life. And then, then the question is, okay, once you are motivated to say, okay, maybe this is just a story and not a fact, then what? How do you find another perspective to take on? And we give people a very prescriptive approach to doing that. And that has been game changing for so many people who, if you think about like, where's all the suffering in people's lives? A lot of it has to do with the stories they're telling themselves. So it's like, if you're looking for more peace, less suffering, choosing a new perspective is a shortcut to helping to create more peace and less suffering.
All right.
So that's, a very short version of what we spend a lot more time on in the book. I don't know if there's anything in there that you want to probe deeper on, but that's a biggie.
Yes. Well, I was like I told you at the beginning, love the book. I think it's fantastic. And I was struck by in Power Principle 4 says, use language of action. Use language of action, which goes back to communicate your intentions and, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't think we realize how important the talk part is. The other thing, Principle 5, stop talking and get curious. Well, I mean, curiosity is the lack of curiosity is what's wrong with the world, if you ask me, right? I mean, we need some curiosity in the world, how do you help people get curious?
Yes. So before we go to curiosity, I just want to say one thing, using language of action, that I think is like a quick get for people and so powerful. And I think one of the issues is that people, like, all of language is kind of like sort of a blur to people. And when you start to unpack how different types of speaking can create different types of results and impact with people, then you gain so much power over language. That's when language can become your friend, when it can really help you to achieve things that are important to you. And one of the distinctions we make is language that we call is on the field versus language that's in the stands. And we talk about, and we give this metaphor of being at a football game. And we talk about how if you're in a football game and you're in the stands and you're a fan, there's certain types of language that people are using in the stands. Things like cheering, booing, educating, analyzing, critiquing. All of that language has some value, right? It has some value, but it's not literally making any impact on what's happening on the field, right? So it's kind of like all happening in the stands over there. And then there's the action that's happening on the field. And then, so putting the football game aside for a moment, the question then is, well, what actually does move things forward in life? What are the things that create action in life and forward momentum? And we kind of share some of the things we have ascertained to be those types of language. One of them is figuring out what the desired outcome is of a conversation. So often people go into conversations without a clue on when it's over, what will have been accomplished, and define not just as, what they want the other person to do, but how they want to leave people feeling and believing. And that's the key to having influence, which is what you need if you have bold aspirations. You need to be able to communicate with influence. So I think setting desired outcomes, huge, huge, and simple once you learn how to do it. And then the other thing is actually making recommendations and making requests. And so often people are just not doing that. They're kind of in circles, like talking in circles. I mean, so many people complain about meetings and they never go anywhere, and we've wasted so much time. And we give people a lot of coaching on how to make a good recommendation, making requests versus just hoping for the best. Asking people to do things sounds so easy, but it makes a lot of people really uncomfortable. to make requests. So that's a little bit about when we say unpacking language and like distinctions in how people speak and how it can be so powerful. So I wanted to start with that before going to the other piece of it, which is the piece about listening and being curious, which I agree, curiosity is extremely underrated and something that most of us have to really work hard not to lose. But the good news is, if you just put your attention on it, anyone can generate curiosity at will by saying to yourself, like, I am going to find something to be interested in, and I'm going to go from there. And then the brain does this really interesting thing, which is it starts to automatically get curious about more and more and more. So once you start that wheel turning, it's like a snowball rolling down a hill in a good way. So that's, kind of a little bit about curiosity. And, why it's so important is because without it, you're mostly not listening. I don't mean you, Dan. I mean, we, collective we, mostly not listening. We're mostly just thinking about what we want to say or thinking about something completely unrelated to the conversation. We're either checked out completely up in our head over here, or just like formulating our reply. That's a big one, right? Like someone's talking and you're just like formulating your reply versus being present and curious and listening. And so that's, a thing that I think many of us, it's so simple. It's a great reminder, and it unlocks trust, and it unlocks depth in relationship and collaboration and connection and all of that goodness, which is so essential in great leadership and in relationships in general. So, we spend a fair amount of time on that and the impact of that. And also the impact of listening in helping leaders to be better coaches versus telling people what to do, which is often what we find ourselves thinking that's our job, right? I have to solve everybody's problem. I have to tell everybody what to do. I have to have all the answers. And, obviously that's not realistic.
No, it's one of the big self-defeating behaviors in the leadership world. Is thinking you got to show up with the answers and tell people what to do. And it's like, oh my, please get over that.
Yeah. Well, and it's habit forming. That's the other thing too, is sometimes it's unconscious. It's an unconscious reflex. And we do this exercise sometimes in our workshops with people where we give them a chance to, we call this the training wheels exercise, because it's like the precursor to any kind of coaching. And in the training wheels exercise, your job is one person, there's two people in the exercise. One person is the listener, and then the other person's job is to share about something in their life that is exciting to them, something that's like giving them some sort of energy or interesting or engaging in their life. So they could talk about their new puppy, or they could talk about a movie they saw, or it doesn't matter, whatever it is. And then the listener's job is just to listen, maybe ask a few questions, not interrupt, not take them on a tangent, not make it about yourself. And we have people do it for about 2.5 minutes. And the feedback we get is that people are like, it was torturous. Like I kept wanting to interrupt. I cannot believe how, to the extent to which, if you had not told me not to interrupt, I would have interrupted 10 times. But then they realized what they got out of it, because they listened and didn't interrupt, is that they learned so much more than they would have if they hadn't done that. And they just, I think, realized the extent to which they've been depriving themselves of other people's thinking and ideas and thought by not doing that. Yes. And that's just the training wheels exercise.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I know exactly what you're talking about. It's incredible. Yes. So the book is Fast Forward, and you're teaching us how to change our lives in a year. And I think it is just absolutely fantastic. Love every bit of it.
Thank you.
It's useful for in the family, useful in business, useful for coaches, useful for entrepreneurs. I can't think of anybody who can get some use from this. So thanks for sending it, and thanks for your conversation today.
Yeah, Dan, thank you so much for having me.